Yo, welcome to Six Layer, the comic signature show, period. I'm Mike the Six Layer, chilling with Mark the Honorable Villain. What up, fam?
What's up, Mike? I love this creator's art. I think he has some of the most classic character designs in the business. Let him know who we got, man.
Man, we have the man, the myth, and the legend, man. He's a rock star. We have the one and only Darick Robertson joining us. But before we chop it up with Darick, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right, our next guest is the co-creator of The Boys. He has done art for Vertigo, DC, and Marvel, plus many, many more. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Land, we bring to you Darick Robertson. What's up, Darick? How you doing?
I'm doing okay. How you doing, Mike?
Man, I'm doing great. We're so excited to have you, man. This is great. All this build up. I love it. Here we're going to go. We're about to get started with our first question. Darick, since it's your first time joining us, we'd like to get your comic book origin story. In other words, how did you get your first gig in pro comics?
Technically, my first pro job would be the first job I got paid for. So that would be Space Beaver back in 1986 when I was still in high school. I was a high school senior who was a terrible student because all I wanted to do was draw and make my stories, and conducive to me getting my diploma. But although it wasn't senior year, I got graded on Space Beaver pages for my high school art class. But the Ninja Turtle boom had just happened in the black and white market way back in the oldie times of 1986, and everybody and their brother was trying to find the next Ninja Turtles because of the success of that property. You've heard of Ninja Turtles, right?
Of course.
Yeah, it's a little property, that little comic book that had a few issues. But yeah, so everybody thought they'd have the next Ninja Turtles, and my comic book career is right when I get to the party is when the cops show up and break it up. That's pretty much my legacy. So that's the same thing that happened with Space Beaver. It kind of died right out of the chute because black and white comics was the first of many publishing bubbles I would live through. So Space Beaver launched and the black and white comic book bubble popped, and but it got me published and right out of high school. So I started taking my lumps from what's the Hard Knocks University very young.
That's amazing, man. Like that you were actually ready for the moment and got it done. I love it.
I've been hungry like a shark since I was a kid. So I just always worked.
Well, now we're going to fast forward several years to your co-creation of The Boys. We want to get a little bit into your head conceptually about how you guys got that series started.
Well, Ennis and I were working for Marvel a lot in those days, and we had a lot of successful collaborations on Punisher and Nick Fury. And I was monthly at the time on Transmetropolitan. And because of the way the scripts would come in, I needed to have something to do when I was waiting on script. So I started taking on other gigs to work on while I was waiting for script for Transmet. And I ended up working with Garth on some of those projects like Punisher Born and Nick and Fury Max, which were big hits, and a few issues of the Punisher. One of them I'm known for was when Wolverine and Punisher fight and Wolverine gets smaller. But that was like early on, that was something that made the two of us realize we have kind of a yin yang when it came to superheroes, and that I loved them and grew up on them. And Ennis was more into the 2000 and AD and war comics and things like that because he grew up in the UK. So American superheroes always seemed sort of silly to him. Like he respected and liked them, but at the same time, like they didn't make sense to him. So those incredible takes that he would have on those characters would come from a place of sort of being an outsider looking in on American comics. For me, like I grew up with Batman and Superman. The Super Friends were like my friends, He just saw people in costumes that didn't make sense to him. So when Transmet wrapped up, he asked me if I wanted to work on this idea he had that was supposed to be a spin-off of Hitman in some ways. where Hitman moved through the DC universe in this sort of outsider's way, and he could tell his own story but have DC heroes in it. And he had the original idea for The Boys, but as we got deeper into the concept and started pitching it to different editors at DC, they came to realize that it was never going to work for like DC proper.
Darick, that's crazy. I didn't know that the same archetype for Hitman fits Billy Butcher. But
yeah, it was the idea that they were going to be this rogue team that would take down the superheroes through spying on them and things like that, which is an essential piece that ended up in the finalized version of The Boys. But when we started getting a lot of pushback, I think it was me that said it, but I was saying, well, why don't we do like Alan Moore did with Watchmen and create our own archetypes and make our own universe and just make our own superhero characters to fill that spot. And that was, how we got the Homelander and the Deep and Starlight and all those characters.
Can you take us back to the time when the boys left Wildstorm and moved to Dynamite?
Yeah, that was weird. It's like, as I was saying, my legacy being, hey, it's I show up at the party and the cops get there. So that's kind of what happened with the boys. I finally had gone through my exclusive at Marvel and was eager to get back to create our own stuff like I enjoyed on Transmetropolitan. And we went to Wildstorm. Everybody, the publisher, everybody was super excited about the property and what we were going to bring to them. And we got off and going, and Ben Abernathy was my editor and one of the best I've ever worked with and a good friend. And everything was going hummingly. And then the book launched, and it was like a huge hit as a comic. We were selling the biggest selling creator-owned book Wildstorm had in years. So everything was going great, but we were like 4 issues in, and we found out that there was trouble because I guess we were going too far. But I understood, the people higher up were worried that the boys were appearing. This is right after Wildstorm kind of got absorbed into DC Comics, so they were concerned that the content side ads for things like Justice League and Batman and the proper books, and it was making people protecting those properties uncomfortable. Like, I personally love those properties. A lot of people think that I just wanted to make Homelander so I could pick on Superman. For me, it was the opposite. Like, I love Superman too much to imply that he would ever do what Homelander does. And that's why we end up creating our own versions of these characters, these own archetypes. But DC was uncomfortable with it. I wasn't, because I was on the West Coast and a lot of this was going down on the East Coast. I wasn't there for the meetings themselves. I heard about them secondhand. But ultimately, it was a friendly parting of the ways. They could have made life really miserable for us, and DC actually handled it classy as could be. But they decided, like, you either are going to make this a PG-13 book, like for Vertigo, or we'll give you your rights back and you can get it published somewhere else. And we took the right option and took the rights back. And it was funny because I had a 5-year career or 5-year contract to do the book, and it was a Friday afternoon, and I had been working like crazy. And we had just bought a house, and I had 2 little kids at the time. They're adult kids now, but I had 2 little kids at the time, and everything was set up, and I get a phone call, and I'm told, like, DC has canceled it. And I was like, what? How can that be? We're like one of their best-selling books. And they're like, it's canceled. And I went out. My wife was putting cabinets together, and I went out and said, hey, I'm out of work. I don't have a job. And she's like, you're kidding. I'm like, no, I don't. I'm out of work. And so we sat down on the couch, and we were like, well, this is crazy. And I said, well, we'll figure it out. And I said, I don't have anything to do for the weekend. Let's take the kids to Disneyland, because we hadn't done that ever. So we got in the car and we drove down from Northern California to Los Angeles to Anaheim. Spent a couple days at Disneyland with the kids, had a good time. I'm on the way back driving on the 5, and like my phone's blowing up, and my phone never blows up. And but I'm checking, but this is pre-iPhone, so it's just like a regular cell phone. I had like call in for messages, but I'm checking messages and I'm getting phone calls from every publisher that knows me. Like everybody I know in the industry is like, "Hey, Darick, we'd like to talk to you about doing The Boys." Like every Dark Horse, Image, like it was everybody had called us wanting The Boys. So that was exciting and a surprise, because here we thought, oh, we're going to be wandering in the wilderness for a while, hoping to find a home for this book, and everybody wanted it. And I go way back with Nick Ferrucci, and so when he said, "Look, I read the book, I love the book. You guys can do whatever you want. We'll do this with it. We'll do that with it." And I took him at his word. So I said should be our it was that or Image. And we ended up going with Dynamite, and they still have it to this day.
Wow.
Darick, tell us this also. How'd you end up working with all the primetime creators of the UK? You know, Garth Ennis, Grant Morrison, Warren Ellis. Did they just like you? Did you have something in? Yeah, that's true. Everyone except for Alan Moore. Alan Moore still hasn't worked with you yet.
I know I haven't worked with Alan. Would love to, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know why, but I think it comes down to the fact that I have a very UK sensibility to my art style, and I love, like, my favorite artist of all time is Brian Bolland. Okay. And my whole career is like a poor attempt to ink like he does. But thing I think I can put to it is that we were at Garth Ennis's wedding, and Steve Dillon and a bunch of the other UK guys like Steve Pugh, John McCrae, all guys that were friends of mine, Liam Sharp, they all took me aside and put a Guinness in my hand, and Steve said, "Darick, you can drink like us, you draw like us, and you swear like us. You're an honorary Brit." and like that was the best Guinness I ever had.
Darick, can you also tell us about the development of the Boys television series?
The Boys was, it took 10 years to get going. They optioned it right after that crazy story I told you about us leaving DC and going to Dynamite. The hype around the book getting canceled and the news around it being so controversial got a lot of eyes on it right away. And one of the things Dynamite did wisely is they got the trade paperback out immediately. So the first 6 issues were collected and released and under the name of the game. And it got to Neil Moritz, who is behind the Fast and the Furious franchise, and his resume is amazing. That guy has executive produced, and his company Kickstart has done just a phenomenal amount of successful movies and TV shows. And so he optioned it for a movie trilogy in 2008. And this was my first lesson on how Hollywood works. We were very excited, and it took over 10 years for it to actually get made. And we were so close so many times that it was mind-boggling. At one point, Adam McKay, behind Anchorman, and he had just done Anchorman, and they wanted him to do Anchorman 2. But Adam McKay, his career was blowing up, and he was fully on board. He was going to direct these movies. He had rewritten the screenplay. He showed me some animatics. We got to be friends. It looked amazing, and he couldn't get anybody to pull the trigger on it. Now, keep in mind, in 2008, Iron Man from Marvel had just dropped. So that was like the closest we ever got to like a hit superhero movie outside of like, Superman the movie and Batman. That was a little more aimed at adults, it had adult content in it and adult themes that, it was not aimed at kids. Like Tony Stark in that first Iron Man, that's a pretty bleak story.
Right.
But it was a huge hit. So it was only then that people started to realize, oh, there's a massive audience for this kind of stuff that isn't kids. But you couldn't convince them that with The Boys at the time. So it languished for a lot of years. Learned a new term called turnaround, which is when somebody drops an option and then it's out there to be picked up again. So and that was a very unfortunate day, because when you think you're going to get a green light and you get put into turnaround, it's like watching your hopes die. So that was and then like anything in life, when you let it go, that's when the universe goes, now you're ready. So I let it go, and through just a wonderful series of coincidences, Eric Kripke found out from a nice gent named Ori Marmer, who is Neil Moritz's right-hand guy, that The Boys was available to be developed. And he went, and so they started talking, and he said, I love that comic book. I want to make that. I want to do a TV show. And boy, when somebody like Eric Kripke wants it, things happen quickly. And here we are. And the nicest thing about it was when I found out it was going to happen that year at San Diego Comic-Con, I'd never met Eric Kripke before. But we arranged to sit down together privately and have a conversation. And I just wanted to know what he had in mind. But what surprised me was his first question to me is like, what do you want the show to be like? And that blew me away, because that is such respect that most creators never get in this business. And so the fact that he had already talked to Ennis, and then he wanted to know what I thought. And my thoughts on it were, hey, as long as it's funny, because if there's no humor in it, it's just going to be a long, dark slog and people are going to tune out. It's the humor that makes this book. And he said, I'm glad you said that. I agree with it. And then I mentioned how I really want, and then I asked him, I said, are you going to have the Huey holding the arms in the first episode? And he was like, geez, I don't know. We were kind of on the fence about that. And I said, you got to have that, because that's where people jump on with the characters. And Daniel Trachtenberg, who directed the first episode, handled it magnificently. So it got all of the emotional hit and content and necessity that was in the comic, but in their own context of how they would do the TV show, which is why the TV show has been so brilliant. It's because they know where the heart of the comic is, but they're telling their own story without destroying the themes or the characters. It's amazing, because a lot of people tell me like, oh, I've never read the comic book, but as soon as I saw him holding those arms, and I'm like, I'm so happy I pushed for that.
That's awesome. Well, Darick, I'm a huge Batman fan.
Me too.
I'd like to know about your experience writing and drawing for the digital first Legends of the Dark Knight. What was that like? It was a different format. Let us know what's up.
Okay, well, the first I have to say, like, my very, very first superhero was Batman. So when I was a little boy, I was watching the Batman TV series from 1966. It was on in the afternoons after school, and I never missed it. Had a big thing for Batgirl. And then for my birthday that year, maybe it was Christmas, I don't know, my mom bought me the Mego Batman action figure with the removable cowl. And that thing was like my teddy bear. Like, I took it everywhere with me. I found if you pulled up on the cowl a little bit, it looked like his eyes were closed. So I'd, all right, good night, Batman. I'm like 5, And so, Batman, so he's deeply embedded in my feelings about superheroes. That blue and gray costume still gives me all the feels. And so to grow up wanting to work in comics anyway, and then finally getting to draw Batman in any capacity, which I did a little bit for Justice League when I broke in. But to come full circle and then be offered a chance to write and draw Batman, that is like my dream come true. And so the only downside of it was I did it for this digital only option. So I had to break my 60-page story into 10-page chunks. But originally it was only going to be a 30-page story, and it was just going to be that whole sequence with, if you've read it, the whole sequence with Joker and Batman out on the barge. Like, that was the whole story I was going to tell, because I love the idea of them being stuck together and bored and just having to deal with each other because there's nothing else to do. They're too sick and tired to fight anymore, and they can't get out of the situation, and it stinks like garbage, and they're freezing cold, and they're both really nauseous and fighting off this chemical they ingested, and then they have to talk. I think that's, to me, that maybe that just gave me all the inspiration. So, but then the editor came back and said, "Hey, we have our only notes for the story are, can you put more villains in it?" And I said, "Yes." And I go, "Can I have 60 pages?" And they said, "Yes." And so there we go. But I had to break it into 10-page chapters. So the rhythm of the writing is a little different than I normally would do it, because I had to find a climactic, like, kind of a commercial break, so to speak, at every 10-page point in the plot. Whereas if it was a normal 60-page story, it would have flowed a little more smoothly. But it was a nice challenge, and more than anything, I got to write and draw and ink most of my own Batman story, and that will always be. And then they released it as #1 because the digital line went away for a little bit, and they brought it back as Legends of the Dark Knight. So I have a #1 Batman comic that I wrote and drew. So that's as good as it gets.
So segueing into your process, your art process, has that changed any or at all over the years as far as how you do your workflow?
Yes. Over the years, I've gotten more disciplined about working in the daytime and putting it away when workday is over. And that has shown through in the quality of my work. When I always wanted to ink my own stuff, and it took a long time for editors to allow me because they thought it would slow me down, but it actually would have sped me up because I spend less time on the pencils and more time on the inks. So, but when I finally got my shot at it, it was Wolverine at Marvel, and then they wanted that book to be like bi-monthly, twice a month. Yes. They wanted, so I couldn't do a whole pencil and ink issue every 2 weeks. So, that sort of derailed that. And then they brought on an inker. Luckily, I got to work with the great Tom Palmer, rest in peace. But it sort of squelched my desire to be more in control of my own artwork, because like I was saying, I love Brian Bolland. And then as I look across the pantheon of artists that I love the most, all of them are their own inkers for the most part, or eventually became their own inkers. So David Mazzucchelli, Dave Gibbons, Dave Stevens, all the guys named Dave. But they are, and Brian Bolland, for example, and they have that unique look to their line, and it's unmistakably them. And so Joe Kubert's a good example. So I wanted to be my own inker, and that was a hard battle to fight for, but now it's assumed that I will, and that's great. And as a result, I've become more disciplined with it. And I think my real first shot at it was doing The Boys. And of course, as soon as that was going great, and then they canceled it and we moved, and then that caused all kinds of scheduling problems that I never quite recovered from. But being my own inker was very important to me. So at this point, I've gotten to be a much better inker than I was when I was doing The Boys, because I was still cutting my teeth, and I look back on a lot of that work, and I was doing it as quickly as possible, and I was but it was like everything. It's like School of Hard Knocks. The only way I've ever gotten better at anything is just going through the fire, coming out the other side.
Darick, you're talking about the black and white boom. I want to come full circle.
I was inking my own stuff then. But I had to learn, even that was like a learning curve. You look at Space Beaver #1, I was doing these ink washes, and they didn't translate to and then that all that original art got destroyed. So I don't have any of my original comic books from those days as far as original art goes. But I was doing these ink washes in issue 1, and they didn't print well at all. So I learned really quickly by issue 2 that cross-hatching was a much better substitute. And so from issue 1 on, the art started to look a little better. But I was doing it all with technical pens.
I want to come full circle too, that you're the next artist on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 5 with Jason Aaron. Yeah. What was it like working with the Turtles for the first time?
That was fun. A lot of people assumed I already had, which was weird. Kind of like when I did Constantine, like everybody just assumed I had done Constantine before. And we were getting like comments about the book, like legendary Constantine artist. I'm like, this is my first time. I'm legendary right out the chute. All right. But because he's a, hard smoking Brit, I guess they just assumed I must have, checked that off my resume. But Ninja Turtles, it was great. I actually really, because they were sort of like the reason Space Beaver didn't do well, like in a weird abstract way. And I love Kevin Eastman. Like he's just one of the nicest people I've ever met, and incredibly gracious with his fans, and exemplary guy for like how to treat people that love a property you created. But but I never really had drawn them before, and I I didn't like the Saturday morning cartoon. I loved Kevin's comics and still think his original look was the best when they all had red masks and it was like real gritty. And then, the comic books were the Saturday morning show was so saccharine that it just didn't, I was too old for it by the time it came out. And then it bothered me that they had strayed so far from Kevin's vision that I sort of tuned it out. And then I liked the Henson movies with the big costumes. They were cute. But most of all, I couldn't believe what a juggernaut that thing has been. Like, it just keeps going and going and going. And so shortly before I even got a chance to work on them, my buddy Dan Hernandez and his writing partner, Benji Sammet, they wrote the Mutant Mayhem movie. And I got wind of it. And Seth Rogen was one of the producers on it. So I got wind of it early and couldn't say anything. But I went and saw that to be supportive of my friend, and I loved it. Like, that to me is like the best Ninja Turtles I've ever been, in my opinion, on screen. And because they really seemed like teenagers, and they were funny, and I felt the story, and now I love them. Now I love these characters. And then they offered me Ninja Turtles, so now I understood their personalities, and so I started out just doing some covers. They asked me to do 4 covers, and I was happy to. So I made all 4 of my covers go together like one big image. And I thought, that's very original. Meanwhile, Danny Earls, who's like the best new hot up and coming artist that I've ever seen, he was doing the same thing with his covers. So we had a good laugh because it almost looked like the reverse angle of what I was doing. I have all my characters jumping at the camera. His characters were all jumping away. And but I was just going to do those covers, but they liked my covers so much they offered me an issue. So I said yes, and then they offered me to be ongoing, and I said yes, and then something went different behind the scenes, and they ended up rescinding that offer. So I was going to do it ongoing for a while, but now I am not. So I just did issue 5.
Well, let's talk about what you touched on a little earlier. You as an honorary Brit, what research went into drawing the world of John Constantine in Hellblazer Rise and Fall?
Oh, well, it's set in Liverpool, so I went and did a lot of research on Liverpool. And I always like to do stuff that looks authentic, and as best as my backgrounds can be. I just feel that gives a character more of a grounding in the story that you're reading about. So if it says it's Liverpool, I'll look up Liverpool and try to work stuff that's recognizable into the background, or at least capture the feel of the place. As far as John goes, I had a natural affinity with him because he's so fully realized as a character already that I just started drawing.
All right, so I got to get into, you mentioned a lot of your artistic influences, but I want to spin my question a little bit, because you also mentioned that you grew up a superheroes guy, and so I want you to give us your 3 favorite superheroes and who is like the quintessential artist in your mind that drew them growing up.
Oh wow, I almost feel like I need to sit down and write 3 essays. All right, well, as I said, I have to say Batman, but I can't say Batman and not include Superman. I have a very different relationship in my head with both of them, but it's like I can't choose one without the other. So I would say World's Finest is still like one of my quintessential teams. And so, because I love them equally for different reasons. Everybody has like Batman is the hero I love and am most fascinated with. But if I could be a superhero, I'd choose Superman because he has all the powers, and his greatest superpower is self-restraint. So the fact that Superman doesn't take over the world, that's why Superman's awesome. Okay, then my next would have to be Spider-Man, because I had to learn to love Spider-Man, because as a little boy, around the same time as I was getting those Mego figures, I was given a copy of a Spider-Man comic, and I didn't understand that Spider-Man was the hero. And so I read the whole thing from the POV that he was a villain, and he scared me. He had no face. I'm very young at the time, but it's so funny because if I show you this sequence, you'd see what I see, but he wasn't actually doing anything except stopping crime. But the whole thing about him I knew enough about spiders because I was terrified of them as a kid. And every time I got terrified of something, I like sharks, I had to learn everything had to learn everything about spiders. So as a kid, I knew that if a spider wrapped you up in a web, he's going to eat you.
Yep.
These guys hanging in webs with a sign for the police, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. I thought, wow, that's cruel. He's going to go back and eat them, So, I totally misunderstood Spider-Man as a kid when I first read it. Then I got to know him, and of course, that also was one of the best things ever, was getting to write and draw Spider-Man, which I got to do at one point in my '90s Marvel career. And I kept getting almost picked to be the regular on Amazing Spider-Man, and it was like watching. It was like getting a girl alone that you're like super hot girl, and you're finally getting alone with her, and she's just going for that bra snap, and the parents come home over and over again, over and over again.
The third character
have to be. Yeah, I gotta say Wolverine.
Okay, so who's drawing these? So who's like your favorite Wolverine artist, Spider-Man artist, Batman artist, Superman artist?
All right. My favorite Wolverine artist has to be with the two people that made me fall in love with the character, and that's a tie between Frank Miller and John Byrne. But then Paul Smith too, like that era of 1983.
That's my favorite, yeah.
With the brown costume. But Paul Smith and John Byrne were kind of going back and forth at that time. But I loved Paul Smith's take on Wolverine, and it was totally unique from John Byrne's. But John Byrne gave him all the personality, and Paul Smith gave him all the dignity. And then when I read Frank Miller's story, it gave him all the earthiness. And those three things are what I love most about Wolverine. It's that he's a very complex character. And when I finally got my shot at drawing him, I was a little annoyed because it was right as Hugh Jackman showed the world what a great Wolverine he can be, but he's 6'3", and that bothered me because I was the guy that would get the handbooks and study them. So the Marvel handbook to this day has him at 5'3", right? And I'm only if I stand up real straight, I'm 5'8". Yeah, I'm a short dude, and so if I stand up at 5'8", I actually saw a guy at a coffee shop the other day that was with his kids, and he was 5'3", because I could tell because I was standing next to him, but he was real buff and he had no hair, and but it's like he was in great shape, and I'm like, that's Wolverine, So it's not like, but then also his wife was probably 5'9", 5'10", very beautiful. So the idea that Wolverine, because this is what I was being told then, is that when I was getting the pushback, but girls love Wolverine. They won't go for a guy who's 5'3". I'm like, he's masculine as can be. He's rich. He's sophisticated, and he'll protect the hell out of you. If you're telling me that those things don't check off on a box for women, you've never talked to a woman. So that's what I always loved about the character. He had this complex history with his time in Japan. That's what the Frank Miller, Chris Claremont story told me. I loved that he had this, that he's sophisticated and worldly, and yet he has to fight back almost like Bruce Banner has to control the Hulk. He has to control going berserk. And the healing factor is one of the coolest things to add, because like with Superman, if you could only pick some of his powers, you don't want flight without invulnerability. You want to be invulnerable. If you're going to fly way up in the air and something could happen where you crash to the ground, you want to be able to be the Man of Steel. You don't want to, otherwise you're going to be like the world's quickest pancake. But,
speaking of Man of Steel, though, who's your Superman artist?
My Superman artist, Neil Adams.
Okay, yeah, is that the same for Batman too?
Maybe. There's so many Batman artists that it's hard to pick one.
You've already said Miller. You've already said Byrne. Are
you a Jim Aparo guy, Batman?
I like Jim Aparo. I like Neil Adams more. Who am I thinking of? Marshall Rogers was the most underrated.
Oh man, yeah.
Strange Apparitions. I tell Mike all the time. My favorite.
Marshall Rogers, I think, was the most underrated Batman artist. But the one I think that really made me, that defined him for me as far as being a young artist of like, how do I want Batman to look? That would probably be David Mazzucchelli with Batman Year One. Like that is the perfect Batman to me. But I like so many different eras that it comes back to whoever was drawing. Oh, you know what? I'm going to have to give it to the one who really cemented him in my head. And that was Carmine Infantino.
Okay,
like,
all right.
He's the one who kind of took it from the goofy Dick Sprang look and brought it more into the modern era where you took him more seriously. And a lot of those early stories that I was reading were Carmine Infantino illustrated. Plus, I have like a glass that has Batman on it, and then overarching with all of the DC characters, Jose Garcia Lopez, that look on those characters is like the definitive model to this day. So.
Oh, okay. Now, did you say Spider-Man? Just give me Spider-Man artist now.
Ross Andrew.
Okay.
Ross Andrew and John Romita Jr. were my two favorites.
Really?
But Ross Andrew drew that first issue I was describing, and I still think he's very underrated as a Spider-Man artist. But I loved Ross Andrew and then John Romita Jr. because when I started to love the character, it was John Romita Jr.'s issues.
So, do you collect comic books? Do you collect art? Do you collect figures? Do you collect anything? Nerdly?
Oh boy, that's like asking if water is wet. Yes. My studio is lousy with action figures. I have a very select but impressive collection of original art, and that I've picked up since the 80s. And yes, my family is now in the process of forcing me to downsize because I had 2 storage units full of collectibles that I am slowly but surely organizing and letting go of.
Okay, so that's a big yes.
Big yes. Get to that point.
I don't gamble. I'm sorry, I don't gamble. I like sports if they're on. It's not my thing, but I can enjoy a game. Love going to a stadium. But like all the things that most guys my age are into and do, I don't. But I have an action figure addiction.
Okay. Oh well. All right. So, what is it? A certain brand, certain characters, like
characters.
Okay.
Like the better the sculpt, the better the sculpt, the better. Like I have to have the new one. Right now, I'm like really into those Mezco 112s.
Okay.
Like so, I've got a small collection of those going. Of course, they're very expensive, so I wait till Christmas, to add to that collection. But I just went out of my way to buy all the pieces and get the McFarlane Plastic Man. That's the Build-A-Figure that came out. It is the best Plastic Man figure it's ever been made.
Really? Okay.
So and he is another favorite character of mine. But I have a lot. I could just keep going and going and going on characters I love. Comic books and action figures. They're the only like hobby that I could think of that really like retains its values. Once you go to a concert, it's not like you can sell that concert back to somebody later on.
Okay, Darick. Last question. Is there something that we haven't talked about that you want the fans to know about? Any upcoming appearances? Any upcoming projects? Anything you have in the works right now?
Yeah, you got me at a bad time because I'm on the cusp of being able to announce some really cool stuff for 2025. I'm going to spend a lot of time in Europe this year, so if you got any European viewers, I will see a lot of you overseas, but I'm going to be at Emerald City Comic Con this year. I've been invited to WonderCon, working that out. What was the other? In New Jersey in April. Those are the only 3 off the top of my head American conventions I'm doing. And as far as work goes, I am going to do 2 new, well, hopefully, if all goes well, because negotiations can go upside down. I'm on the verge of signing contracts for 2 new creator-owned books for 2025. And one of them is with Tom Taylor. So awesome. Tom and I are creating something brand new. I can't say much about it because, again, we're right on the verge of having the contracts done. And I know the publisher is going to want to be the people that, put out the big announcement. But I can say Tom Taylor and I are making up something brand new, and it's such a great idea Tom had that I can't wait to start drawing it.
Man, I love that.
Excited for
That's
that.
awesome. Darick, thank you so
It's
much.
bonkers good. It's a bonkers great idea.
And that's saying a lot coming from you, man.
It's Tom Taylor. You know it's going to be quality.
It's Darick Robertson. We know it's going to be quality.
It's going to, well, let's just say, you know, my wheelhouse. It's going to have it all. There will be blood.
Well, Darick, thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome, man. Us making this happen. You always have a home here on the Six Layer Station. Thank you so much.
Well, when the new stuff comes out, invite me back and we'll talk about it.
Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is Six Layers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark and Darick Robertson. We are out. Peace.
Six Layers.